think I should welcome you on stage and say how happy we are that you have joined. As the audience probably knows, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, or Tulsi for the purpose of this conversation, is also co-chair of the India caucus in the House and has just taken over this responsibility recently. And of course, she's deeply been involved with Indian affairs and India-US affairs for years now, and has been a very important partner for all of us. So I had some thoughts on what I wanted to convey to this audience, but I think that if I may ask you to begin with as to how you see the India-US relationship from your vantage point on the Hill, and then perhaps we can take it from there.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I'd like to say thanks to FICCI and IFA and the Asia Society for hosting what I hear has been a tremendous and outstanding day. Like the Ambassador, I just came in from Washington, D.C., where there is still quite a lot of excitement and a feeling of momentum around the Prime Minister's recent visit and a number of the engagements that surrounded his time here. For so many people, those of us on the U.S.-India caucus feel it, and we believe it, as well as those who've been working on the U.S.-India partnership and friendship for years are saying over and over again, this is the most exciting time in the friendship between our two countries, where there is an alignment both on the political front in both countries, but also if you look at the economic partnerships and opportunities that are now beginning to flourish and where the potential is really being seen and recognized. But also if you look at what's happening in technology and in education and culture and even in arts. Having IFA here is very appropriate given how much more interest not only the Indian American audiences have, but Americans as a whole have in films coming from India, and what that is doing to increase the understanding and increase the affinity between the people of our two countries. So that's where those of us on the U.S.-India caucus are very much looking forward and are excited about the opportunities that exist that are mutually beneficial for both of us.
I think that's very important because since you belong to the Democratic Party, I think it's very important to underline that the support for the India-US engagement is really bipartisan, and it's across the political spectrum, and that is something that we have been very appreciative of. It's a source of tremendous strength for India in the US, knowing how much support we have on the Hill across the political spectrum. As you know, we have not had the chance really to talk too much about after the Prime Minister's recent visit, but I think it's perhaps, if you allow me, I'll just say a few things about that. I think the visit that we just had was really a landmark visit in the sense that it came fairly early on in the new administration, within the first 6 months of the new administration taken over. It came at a time when the administration has still not fully even appointed everybody that it has to appoint. But it came because there was a desire on both sides for the two leaders to establish a one-to-one relationship, a personal chemistry, if you like, and thereby give an impetus to the entire relationship, which had already been in a pretty good place at the end of the Obama administration. And I think that with that aim, when Prime Minister Modi met President Trump a month ago, or less than a month ago, it's difficult to believe it's only 3 weeks ago, I think it was a very successful meeting. They had a long, extended hours, of about 4 or 5 hours of interaction in the White House. And perhaps a lot of it didn't come out into the press, but they did sort of hit it off in terms of understanding, in terms of engaging each other, in terms of listening to each other's concerns. And I must say that the entire White House experience was a very warm and cordial experience. A number of special gestures were made to make the Prime Minister feel at home and comfortable. And that set the ground for some very important decisions and statements during the press conference and also in the joint statement, which actually have given us, the sort of the bureaucrats who have to now take up this, enough leverage now to pick up from where the previous administration left off and take this relationship forward. And if we have to look at one thing that I think that would come out of as a broad theme of the visit, I somehow favor the idea or the theme of convergence. There was a convergence on strategic and defense issues. There was a convergence on economic issues. There was a convergence on cooperation, which is for the global good, in the sense of whether we are talking of medical research or we are talking of cybersecurity or we are talking of space. There was a convergence even in those areas. So overall, I think the visit has been a landmark visit. And I know the Prime Minister this time it was a short visit. We didn't have time for an interaction on the Hill. But that is something which we have done in the past and we hope we will do in the future also.
And we look forward to it. For those of you who haven't read the joint statement that came out of that visit, it's quite impressive and quite extensive in covering a number of different sectors and different areas, as you said, really laying down the pathway forward for our two countries. And the bipartisanship, Ambassador, that you talked about is very real. And that was one of the most often asked questions that both I and my fellow co-chair, Republican Congressman George Holding, often got over the last few months prior to this visit was, where does the U.S.-India relationship go with a new administration? There were a lot of questions and some uncertainty. Is this going to create some obstacles or impediments to forward progress and the momentum that really occurred under the Obama administration primarily? But you know, what we have told people, and I think what we have seen come before, during, and after President Trump and Prime Minister Modi's visit was that while heads of state can meet and have these important diplomatic talks and negotiations, really the heart and the backbone of the relationship, yes, it lies within other government officials at various levels, but it also really exists within the private sector, within our businesses, within our schools and research facilities, within so many different parts of our community that really are not waiting for marching orders from anyone in government. And that's where you see, I think, more than many issues that we face in Washington, this bipartisan commitment to being able to continue that. I met recently, the other day, with someone from CII who was visiting from India, and I asked him, what's one of the biggest takeaways that you want us to share with our colleagues in Congress? And what was interesting and a little unexpected for me was he talked about how important it is for policymakers in the United States to understand the individual identities of all of the states in India, that they are very diverse, that they are competing against each other in many different ways and have very unique things to offer, both within the economic boom that is happening in India, but also to American businesses who are looking towards India for investment. So I was proud to share with him that in a few months we'll be announcing formally the sister state partnership between my home state of Hawaii and the state of Goa in India, two states that have many, many similarities, both in history and in economy and agriculture and education. So this is just one example of where there is a lot of unexplored opportunity for our unique 50 states to be able to build more of these relationships on a state-to-state level and increase awareness in both countries.
Thank you very much, and this gives me an added reason to visit Hawaii.
It's an open invitation. I have been trying to get him to come for months.
Next
he won't do it.
And I'm going to follow up with a visit to Goa, just to make sure that you are really sisters.
We're on the same page.
But I think one point you mentioned was about the doubts that people had about how things would go with the new administration, and particularly on the economic side. There was a number of questions I used to face was, is Made in India going to contradict Make America Great Again? And this was a question which I really never saw the sense of, because I said, here are two countries which are clearly both growing and wanting to grow. And surely there must be a place in this world for two countries to grow and help each other rather than at each other's cost. And frankly, that is exactly the sense that has come out in the joint statement and came out in the press statements of the two leaders, because the two countries have been positioned now as two engines of growth, which are actually going to help each other grow. Given our there's several factors. One is, of course, the India story, which this audience doesn't need to hear from me today. They are part of it, many of them. The fact that if India is going to grow like it is growing, it is going to be an engine which can even pull the American companies behind it. For instance, just to take the civil aviation sector. We are one of the fastest growing civil aviation industries in the world. And there are in the pipeline something like an order of 200 aircraft placed on American companies. Now, this in itself is a huge factor which is going to be, which can wipe out the so-called smallish trade surplus that India has pretty quickly. Energy is another area. Now, India is energy hungry, it's energy deficient, and we're looking all over the world. And if we have to grow at the rate that we are growing, or at a higher rate, then we can't do so without energy. And we're looking at all forms of energy. Naturally, the more environmentally better, the better. And the US is now changing its policies on investment in the energy sector and of export of energy. So next year, we're really going to see the beginning of the first LNG flowing to India. And over the next few years, the expectation is that energy to the tune of about $40 billion will be imported by India from the US. So if I just mentioned civil aviation and energy, it shows how the two countries will need to depend upon each other to grow and will actually create employment opportunities in each other's countries through this growth. So I'm glad we've got over that. And now the energy thing particularly, there's going to be an energy dialogue later this year. And even when we hear talk of the US going back to coal, I think there is scope for cooperation because we are still coal dependent also. And we are keen to look at clean coal technologies from the US. And this is something which the US can provide. So there are a myriad avenues of development. And I certainly see the economic aspects as being one of the most important. And you rightly said the private sector doesn't need a direction from anybody, but the private sector does benefit from an overall sort of positive feel between the two countries, the two governments, and the two leaderships.
And I think, in a lot of the narratives that we hear sometimes, it's about India's, developing economy and country being able to take lessons learned from things that we've already gone through and either, kind of worked our way through the hard path and being able to share those success stories. But there's also lessons learned and things that the United States can benefit from as India is is dealing with different challenges and opportunities. And just two very quickly come to mind. Your worker base is huge, and the need for those jobs and the job training that goes with that, I think, is one of those challenges and opportunities that exist for India. And if we in the United States can look at maybe some of the innovative ways of how some of these companies or how India is providing that training, we can look to some of our economies and communities where folks are either have been replaced by technology or whose industries have been shut down or shipped off to other countries, where job training is a real need. So as we're looking at new opportunities here, whether it's in the middle part of the country and the Rust Belt, or in some of our inner cities, or in some of our impoverished or underserved communities, we can see how countries like India are taking the best of technology in being able to empower people in their communities, rather than what we're seeing too often is where people are unemployed and being driven to the cities and away from the places that they've called home for all of their lives.
No, absolutely. I think the digital partnership is something which has been agreed upon, and can really be pay very rich dividends, given the entrepreneurship, given the innovative skills in both the countries. And I think this is going to be an area on which there is going to be a lot of cooperation. In terms of the Indian companies themselves, a large number of them, today Indian companies are investing in about 35 states in the US, including in the Rust Belt, to the tune of about $15 billion. And I think, at least I'm constantly surprised when I see the kind of investment, the kind of involvement the Indian companies have. For instance, I know companies are hugely investing in universities in the United States, in running programs, in skilling programs. And India at the moment has a huge Skill India program, which I think about 400 million people are going to be skilled over the next few years. So there's a huge program. There's a huge startup program for which American companies can play a huge role. Interestingly, when the Prime Minister was here, he met separately over a round table 20 top CEOs of American companies. You had all the biggies in the IT, in infrastructure, in retail, and the fact that they came on a Sunday morning for a round table, many of them changing their schedules of global travel, showed that they saw India as a worthwhile partner to talk about, to share their views with the Prime Minister, to some of them to point out some concerns they had. And it was a very freewheeling sort of interactive suggestion. So yes, there is a huge interest and there is huge potential.
I think the last piece that we haven't touched on is security and counterterrorism. As I sit on the House Armed Services Committee, where obviously this is a major issue that we deal with constantly, and it is to be noted that the number of military-to-military engagements and exercises between the United States and India exceeds any other partner in the region, and is only continuing to grow. From the top all the way to the Pacific Command commander, there is a recognition of the benefit to continuing to strengthen this partnership, continuing to engage in ways that hadn't been before, in ways to ensure the countries are stable and that we are dealing with this unconventional counterterrorism threat together, because as we do that together, we are stronger.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important area of cooperation. Even as we speak, one of the biggest exercises is going on, the Malabar exercise, in which India, Japan, and the US are participating. And we have, this for the first time, you have aircraft carriers from India and the US exercising together, along with submarines and about 90-odd aircraft. So it's a huge exercise which shows the increasing interoperability of the forces. India, incidentally, today exercises more with the US than with any other country. And this is an area now, as last year, thanks to the support on the Hill, India has been designated as a major defense partner. So that means we are amenable to getting equipment, platforms, technology, which would be given to the closest partners and allies of the United States. And one of these examples we saw in the offer that was made during the Prime Minister's visit on the Sea Guardian. On counter-terrorism, I think there has been an increasing recognition that we need to fight this together. And this is obvious from the huge reaction we have received, for instance, in the last horrific attack on pilgrims in India. Thank you. Even you had given a personal reaction in your tweet. There's been reaction from the White House. There's been reaction from the State Department. There's been reaction from a large number of people in the Congress, senators and congressmen and women. And this follows up on what was decided during the Prime Minister's visit. For instance, one of the leaders of the Hizbul Mujahideen was designated as a globally designated terrorist, which showed a marked increase in cooperation. There has been set up a new mechanism in which there will be constant consultations for such designations. And of course, there is a cooperation between the various agencies involved in countering terrorism. There is also cooperation not only in the Indo-Pacific, which is a very important part of, the PACOM commander and others are deeply involved in that. There's also cooperation in another area, which is Afghanistan, in which India has a huge stake as a partner of Afghanistan. One of our largest, the largest present rehabilitation reconstruction program is in Afghanistan, and it has major impact on what happens to India's trade and connectivity with Central Asia as well as security in that area. And so close consultations with the US are absolutely necessary. And this again was recognized in the joint statement. India's role in Afghanistan has been recognized, and India as a player along with the US, that equation is well established. So yes, security, defense, and counterterrorism are very important, given the fact that these are two countries who basically have a fundamentally democratic setup. And they are multi-ethnic countries, multilingual countries, and open societies, which by definition are more open to the threats of terrorism than other kinds of societies. So the need for us to cooperate both bilaterally, both in other fora around the world and in the United Nations is extremely important. Perhaps if there are any comments or questions from the floor, we could take a few, and I don't know how much time we have, but... Sure.
Just speak.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman. I was really hoping you would get a cabinet position in Trump's administration. But now I'm rooting, hoping for the day when I can work on the presidential cabinet. My question is, the Indian Prime Minister has often said, distinguished between there is no such thing as good terrorism and bad terrorism. And you yourself, you introduced this bill in Congress to stop arming rebels and Al-Qaeda, which is, and you insist on that despite fierce opposition on both sides. The president, in his meeting with Macron, the president of France, Trump and Macron have both said, our priority is not to take down Assad, it's to fight ISIS. And do you see this difference with the new administration? Because it's very unclear what our priority is. Is it to fight ISIS or to fight Assad? And they are different, which many people don't agree on. So what do you see?
Thank you for raising the question, giving me the opportunity to talk about my legislation. In a nutshell, I agree with you that the United States policy towards Syria has been muddled and is unclear. You have statements, as you've referenced, on the one hand, saying that our priority is to defeat terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but on the other hand, you have, the Trump administration launching of 59 Tomahawk missiles at Syria without any authorization of war, authorization to use military force coming from Congress or consultation or any such thing. So You know, I think it's important for the security of our country and for the resources that are being expended there to be very clear about what our objectives as a country are, and to make sure that they are actually working for our best interest, for the use of those resources, and towards the defeat of these terrorist groups that we've been talking about, that not only threaten the people in the region, but pose this threat to countries all around the world. What my bill, the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, does very simply is it says that the United States is prohibited from using any federal funding from any agency to provide arms or support or intelligence or equipment or any type of support to terrorist groups or armed militants who are allied with and fighting alongside them. Unfortunately, we have seen in Syria specifically, and also indirectly in Yemen, how our American taxpayer dollars have been used to provide arms to these groups who are allied with and often working under the command of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda in this regime change war that's been waged now for years. This has been primarily led by the CIA, but we've seen time and time again how this action, that if anyone in this room were found to be providing aid or support to a terrorist or a terrorist group, you'd be arrested. So our U.S. policy and our U.S. law must be consistent with that, and making sure that our taxpayer dollars are not going to strengthen and help and support the very terrorist groups that we are at war with and trying to defeat. Finding different ways to get involved, putting yourself forward, whether it's in this administration, as the ambassador said, there's still a lot of seats and jobs and offices that are empty. So some could say there's opportunity there. But look, getting involved with Congress. I have two Indian American college students who are interns in my office right now, people in various professions. There are so many different ways to be able to engage in policy or in the political realm. And there is oftentimes hesitation, unfortunately, sometimes more often from women than men, saying, well, I don't know if I have the right qualifications, I don't know if I have the right capabilities to be able to do the job. But you would be surprised that the unique story, the unique background, the unique experiences of our Indiaspora here in the United States provide a very necessary approach and asset to many different areas of our government, whether it be on the administration or in Congress or in other areas. So the biggest step, and oftentimes the hardest step, is that first one of putting yourself forward and being prepared to be successful.
Well, certainly they'll be most welcome. How we're going to do it is by increasing interest in India, whether it's in the universities here, whether it's in the schools here, whether it is through culture and tourism, or whether it is a deep quest which comes from one society for another. I think if you just take the India journey to the US, it starts off with an economic impetus, and then moves on to broader things, more professional things, and sometimes now it begins even the reverse journey. You can see perhaps people who worked here suddenly say, no, I can get a better job in Mumbai or Bangalore, and they're going back. So ultimately, I think it's what the country has to offer and what you need from here, which must match up at some stage. And fundamentally, it is the information gap which has to be bridged.
There's not much to add to that. I agree completely. It's about raising awareness and in a substantive way in so many different areas of the benefits of being able to go and visit India, whether it be for school or some other reason. And I've heard a lot of stories from personal friends of mine, as well as people who I'm meeting for the first time, who've gone to India working with an NGO or a nonprofit, taking a few months or taking a year even out of their lives to go and try to be of service and to help make a positive impact, and that being a truly deeply impactful experience that's shaped their lives.
I think there's been a hand up there for a while. Yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador Sarna, Congresswoman Gabbard. It's a privilege. Appreciate your comments. I find myself surprised that I'm asking you this question. Put out two pieces of information, quickly connect the dots to ask my question. I've been a New Yorker for 25 years. I have 3 children, one of whom is a 9-year-old daughter. And my wife and I spend a lot of time making sure we have as good parents to her as we are to our 2 boys. On the other hand, as an Indian living in New York now for 25 years, I obviously read with great pride and attend these events with great pride, and I hear of the progress that India has been making. But I've seen this sentiment sort of bubble up throughout today's events, which sort of came into sharp focus earlier today when former Bollywood actress Preeti Zinta was up there talking about some initiatives she's taking for women's safety. I have to tell you that this is only a personal perspective. Every story that I hear about India's progress and growth and great cooperation and friendship between the 2 countries, that glow is diminished every time I read a story in the newspapers here about how India is abjectly failing to protect women in India. And what initiatives can the 2 countries work together to sort of make it an imperative for India to understand that even those of us who are part of the so-called Indian diaspora here are really getting very, very deeply disappointed and upset at the abject lack of focus on this issue, and talk about business growth and economic growth and security from a nation is terrific and it's important. But I think it's also important for a country, the largest democracy in India, to also be focused on the fact that the non-safety of women in India is taking a toll on India's international image. I'd love your thoughts. Thank you.
How often do you visit India?
Once a year.
Right. I ask that question simply because, there is very often, and I'm not denying anything that you have said. I'm not going to say that every woman is safe in India 24 hours of the day, 7 days of the week. But what I would not accept is your description of that there is, an abject ignorance or abject lack of effort on this end. I'm not sure if you visited India immediately in the aftermath of the Delhi rape attack. I was there. And the kind of groundswell of protest, of action, and reaction that horrible incident had in India was something that had to be seen, to be believed. I know it was very close to New Year, and in Delhi, New Year parties are happening all over. The number of New Year parties that were cancelled, the hotels stopped celebrating, just to show how deep. I mention this only to how deep the impact of any of these incidents is. So I would not say that there is an abject disregard for this aspect at all. I think the problem is immense. The country is huge, and it's not just women's safety which is an issue. There are several others which we need to tackle also. So I think there is a hugely increased awareness in the last few years. The laws have changed very dramatically. The rape law, for instance, has undergone huge changes. The awareness, the responsiveness of the law and order machinery has become increasingly transparent and is called to show response. The expectations of society have increased hugely. We are not there all the way yet, but every day there are things being changed to help, whether it is women's taxis, whether it is response of local police units at night which are patrolling the streets, whether it is the activity of the NGOs and the civil society which is keeping a watch on the law and order machinery in its own way. So I think as much as can be done is being done, much more needs to be done. But I would not agree that there is disregard of this issue.
Thank you. I think we've had a great session. Ambassador, Ms. Gabbard, grateful to you for converting this into an in-conversation, impromptu. May I request you to stay on? I'd really like to say a big thank you on behalf of FICCI and IFA to the Asia Society Policy Institute, both the organization, Mr. Rudd, and the team out here has been outstanding in their stellar work and also the cooperation extended to all of us. I'm going to request for final remarks the Director General of FICCI, Mrs. Ambika Sharma, to address us.
Respected Ambassador Mr. Sarna, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, Sabaz Joseph, and the audience who have been patiently sitting with us since morning. I would like to particularly thank our esteemed guests, and I think it's a great finale of today's conference, and let's give them a big hand. I would also like to mention that as with many destinations, we hope that today's Global Business Forum has done its due share to bring the business community, the policymakers, and the civil society, and the Indian and the US businesses together. And with this, my very, very brief closing remarks, because we are already delayed, I would like to thank Asia Society, which they have been very kind to host this event in a very historic location. And we are very fortunate to have other partners on board, different associations who have supported from the diaspora organizations, and also our special thanks to the Consul General's Office, who has been supporting and guiding this initiative. So friends, with this we come to an end, and let's give a big hand to the beautiful audience also who have been sitting with us. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence of my colleagues from New Delhi, Ritika Batra, who heads our US office, and Mr. Sandeep Samadar, who have been tirelessly working with the Wizcraft team to make this event a great success. Thank you, Ritika. Thanks, Sandeep. Thanks.